Do you know which objects Saint Teresa of Jesus had in mind when she warned that certain things should not be in your bedroom on Divine Mercy Sunday? They are not strange or exotic things. They are not objects you would have to go searching for. They are things you almost certainly have in that room right now as you listen to this, without realizing that their presence in that intimate space on this particular Sunday can close the door to one of the most extraordinary graces the Church has ever known: Divine Mercy. Sunday is not an ordinary Sunday. It is the only moment in the entire year when heaven opens a window that remains shut on every other day. And Saint Teresa knew this. She warned about it. And what she warned about has everything to do with what is in your bedroom tonight. Because Saint Teresa of Jesus did not speak of the bedroom as just another room in the house. In her writings, she treated it as the place where the soul is most exposed, most vulnerable, most open, both to what comes from above and to what comes from below. And there are objects that, when present in that space on Divine Mercy Sunday, do not simply fail to help. According to her warning, they actively block the grace that this Sunday pours out. Which objects are they? Why this Sunday and not another? And what does what you keep in a drawer have to do with what God wants to give you? Write the word mercy in the comments right now if you are willing to find out, because what Saint Teresa warned deserves to be heard all the way to the end. Each part of what follows depends on the one before it, and the most important thing comes when you least expect it. To understand why Saint Teresa of Jesus issued this warning about the bedroom and Divine Mercy Sunday, you first need to understand what that Sunday truly is, not in abstract terms, not as a date on the calendar that is observed and then forgotten, but in terms of what actually happens on that day from the perspective of supernatural grace. Because if you do not understand what this Sunday carries with it, you cannot understand why Saint Teresa warned what she warned, and you cannot understand why the objects in your bedroom matter so much on that particular day, and not on any other Sunday of the year. Divine Mercy Sunday is the first Sunday after Easter. The Church officially established it in the year 2000, but the revelation that sustains it is older than that decree and far deeper than any official document. Christ himself, in his appearances to Saint Faustina Kowalska, described this Sunday as the day when the depths of his mercy stand wide open for every soul that draws near. Not for perfect souls, not for those who have lived without failing, for every soul, for the soul that has spent years feeling far from God, for the soul that prays and wonders whether anyone on the other side is listening, for the soul that carries guilt it believes is beyond remedy. On this Sunday, Christ promised a grace that has no equal at any other moment in the liturgical year, a grace he himself compared to what is received at baptism. The soul that approaches with true readiness on that day can leave that Sunday as though it had been born again, cleansed of everything it had been carrying. Saint Teresa of Jesus died in 1582, more than 3 centuries before Saint Faustina received these revelations. But Saint Teresa knew something that any soul that has genuinely entered contemplative prayer eventually comes to know: that there are moments in the liturgical year when heaven bends toward earth with an intensity that has no parallel on ordinary days. Saint Teresa lived this in her own flesh. She described it in her writings with a precision that could only come from direct experience, not from speculation. In the book of her life, she wrote about certain feasts, certain instances of singular grace, when she felt that God was not behind a veil, but within a breath of her own face. That the distance between the soul and God grew so thin in those moments that any interior movement crossed it without effort. That is exactly what happens on Divine Mercy Sunday. The veil between the soul and God thins until it becomes almost transparent. The grace that flows on that day flows with an abundance that the devoted soul can perceive if it is in a condition to receive it. And this is precisely where Saint Teresa's warning comes in, because she knew with the same clarity with which she knew everything she knew about contemplative prayer, that grace does not act in a void. Grace acts upon a soul, and the soul lives in a body, and the body lives in a space. And that space, depending on what it contains, can be open to receiving grace, or it can be, without anyone having consciously chosen it, closing the door with its own hands. This is not a magical idea. There is nothing superstitious or esoteric about it. It is Catholic doctrine of the purest and most ancient kind. The Church has always taught that the physical surroundings of the Christian are not spiritually neutral. That is why she blesses homes. That is why she consecrates churches. That is why she draws such a clear distinction between sacred space and profane space. The place where you live is not simply a container of furniture and objects without spiritual meaning. It is the environment where your soul breathes each day, where your prayer is born or is smothered, where grace finds or does not find the conditions it needs to do its work in you. And the bedroom within that environment is the most decisive space of all. It is the place where you are most alone, most still, most close to yourself, most exposed in the silence of the night to what comes from above and to what comes from below. Saint Teresa of Jesus understood this exactly. In the interior castle, she describes the soul as a castle of shining diamond with many rooms, with the Lord dwelling in the innermost of them all. But that castle doesn't exist in isolation from the world around it. It has a constant relationship with its surroundings. And what surrounds the soul in the bedroom while it sleeps, while it prays, while the day ends and no distraction remains, that environment is not indifferent to the state of the soul. It carries weight. It carries real and concrete influence. It can be an influence that prepares the soul to receive, or it can be an influence that, without anyone having wished or planned it, closes the soul upon itself. And here is where Saint Teresa of Jesus opens her warning. Not as a rigid list of prohibitions, not as an external set of rules to be followed out of obligation, but as what every word she ever wrote always was, a mother's word. A word born from someone who has seen with her own eyes what the soul can receive when it is truly ready, and who cannot stay silent when she sees something blocking that readiness from within. There are objects, Saint Teresa warns, that should not be in the bedroom of a person who wants to receive the extraordinary grace that Divine Mercy Sunday brings. Not because those objects are evil in themselves, but because their presence in that intimate space at that singular moment of the year speaks of something in the soul that has not yet released what it needs to release for God to enter with everything that Sunday carries. Can a material object block a supernatural grace? Saint Teresa's answer is not a simple or comfortable one. And what she wrote on this subject is one of the teachings her Carmelite sisters preserved most carefully across the centuries, because it touched something they had all experienced without knowing quite how to name it. Something that has to do with the relationship between the visible world and the invisible one, between what you keep in a drawer and what God can or cannot deposit in your soul when He bends toward you with all His mercy. That is what comes next, and it is closer to your everyday life than you might imagine. Saint Teresa of Jesus had a relationship with physical space that was uncommon among the women of her time, or the religious of her time, or almost anyone of her time. While others saw the material environment as simply something given, something you inhabited without thinking too much about it, Saint Teresa saw it as a language, as a way in which the soul speaks about itself without using words. What a person places in their bedroom, in the most intimate space where they live and rest and pray, is not random. It is a silent confession of the soul's interior state, a confession that sometimes the person themselves has not yet been able to make out loud, either before God or before themselves. This intuition did not come to Saint Teresa from philosophy or academic theology. It came from prayer. It came from decades of contemplative life in which she learned to read the soul from the inside and to recognize how the external world reflects it with a faithfulness that astonishes anyone who sees it for the first time. In the interior castle, when describing the first rooms of the inner castle, Saint Teresa speaks of souls that are inside the castle but live so close to the outer walls that they are almost indistinguishable from what lies outside. Souls that in principle love God, that pray, that fulfill their religious obligations, but that carry so many attachments, so many unresolved ties, so many things they have not wished or known how to release, that prayer cannot penetrate to where God waits to meet them. These souls pray, but they pray from the hallways of the castle, not from its center. And the difference between praying from the hallways and praying from the center changes everything. And those attachments, those unresolved ties, those things the soul has not let go, always end up taking material form somewhere in the space where the soul lives. Saint Teresa saw this again and again throughout the foundations she made during her lifetime. When she arrived at a new house that was to become a home of Carmelite prayer, the first thing she did was not to go straight to the oratory. The first thing she did was to walk slowly through each space, to look at what was in every room, to see what objects had been left behind by previous occupants, what things the sisters had brought with them without examining them, what was in the corners that no one had touched for a long time. Because she knew that all of it spoke, that all of it had an influence on the souls who were going to live in that space. That a house that had not been reviewed and ordered with spiritual intention was a house that offered resistance to grace without anyone having decided or wanted it to be that way. The bedroom of a person who lives in the world is not so different from the cell of a discalced Carmelite. It serves the same essential function in the life of the soul. It is the place of retreat, of silence, of the deepest intimacy with God that happens in the darkness and quiet of the night. And what lives in that bedroom lives also in that silence. What is in the drawers, on the shelves, on the walls, in the corners, that have not been honestly examined in months or years, all of it forms part of the environment in which the soul rests, and if it is in a condition to do so, prays. That is why the bedroom is not simply the place where the body sleeps each night. It is the place where the soul is most exposed, most vulnerable, most open both to the grace that comes from above and to the burdens that come from within. And what surrounds it at that moment of maximum exposure cannot be a matter of indifference to anyone who wants to receive God. Saint Teresa of Jesus is explicit about this in The Way of Perfection when she addresses the subject of interior recollection. She says that the soul that wants to gather itself in prayer needs the help of its exterior environment, because that environment can favor recollection or make it difficult in ways the soul cannot always identify on its own. She does not say the environment is determinative above the will of the soul. She says it helps or hinders, and that distinction is important to hold clearly. God can reach a soul in any circumstance and in any environment. God can touch the most closed heart in the midst of the greatest disorder. But when the soul wants to actively prepare itself to receive a particular grace, when it wants to open itself with its whole will to a liturgical moment as powerful as Divine Mercy Sunday, the environment where it lives matters. The bedroom matters. What is in it matters in a way that Saint Teresa of Jesus did not leave unnamed. And what kinds of objects did Saint Teresa identify as incompatible with the interior readiness that Divine Mercy Sunday requires? She did not identify them in the cold language of a prohibition list. She identified them in the warm and precise language of someone who knows the human soul from the inside, who knows why those objects are there, who understands the love and the pain that place them in that spot, and who even so cannot stay silent about what they are doing in the most intimate space of the soul. What she described falls into 4 categories that any person, if they look at their bedroom, with the calm honesty Saint Teresa asked for, can recognize without difficulty. And the first of those groups is also the hardest to face, not because it is the strangest, but because it is the closest to the heart. There are objects in many people's bedrooms that did not arrive there by chance. They were brought by grief. They were brought by love. They were brought by that moment when someone you loved with your whole soul left this world, and all that remained of their presence were their belongings. A photograph in the frame you placed on the nightstand, because for the first months you could not close your eyes without seeing their face. A rosary that belonged to your mother, that you cannot move from where it sits, because moving it feels like a betrayal of her memory. A piece of clothing folded carefully in a drawer that no one in the house speaks of openly, but everyone knows is there. A letter. A watch that no longer keeps the right time, but that no one has touched. A bottle of perfume with no owner left, that you still keep because the day you decide to take it away, something you are not ready to name will have ended forever. Saint Teresa of Jesus knew that grief from the inside. Not as a theorist or a detached observer, she knew it because she had lived it. She lost her mother when she was 12 years old, and that blow marked her in a way she herself described in the book of her life as one of the moments that most defined the direction of her spiritual life. It was then, in that early and devastating loss, that she turned toward the Virgin Mary with an intensity that would never leave her. She knew what it is to cling to what remains when what matters most is gone. She knew what it is to refuse to let go, because letting go hurts more than anything the soul has ever felt. And precisely because she knew this, because she lived it in her own heart as a girl and as a woman, when she spoke of these objects in the bedroom, she did not do so with coldness or distance. She did so with the deep tenderness of someone who understands perfectly why they are there, and who even so cannot stay silent about the weight they carry and the weight they impose. Because these objects, those that belong to someone who has passed, have a particular quality that sets them apart from any other kind of object that might be in the bedroom. They carry a bond of genuine love, yes, but also a bond of grief that in many cases has not been fully surrendered to God. A grief the soul has held alone, in silence, without finally bringing it to the Lord with open hands. And that bond, kept in the bedroom, in the most intimate space where the soul rests each night, speaks of something inside the soul that has not yet pronounced its final yes to the will of God. It has not yet finished saying, I trust you with this too. I trust you with this person you took from me before I was ready to let them go. I trust you with this love that I do not understand how it can still exist with such force when there is no longer anyone visible to direct it toward. Saint Teresa of Jesus expressed this with an image that her Carmelite sisters repeated for generations. She wrote that the soul that keeps for itself what it should entrust to God becomes a castle whose outer doors are open but whose inner doors are closed. It can receive God's visit to a certain point. It can feel that something is arriving, that something is drawing near with love in moments of prayer. But in the innermost room, where the Lord wants to dwell in fullness and without restriction, there is a space the soul has reserved for its own pain, its own grief, for that love it has not wanted to release, because releasing it feels like losing the departed a second time. And while that inner space remains occupied by what the soul retains, grace can surround it with all its abundance, but it cannot penetrate to the depths where true transformation happens. This is not about blame. Saint Teresa of Jesus never spoke of blame in this context, and it is important to say that clearly so that no one listening feels they are being pointed at harshly. She spoke of unknowing. She spoke of souls who love with all their strength and who, precisely because they love, do not yet understand that this love, when it becomes retention, when it becomes a clinging that has not passed through God's hands, ceases to be only an act of love toward the departed and becomes also an obstacle. For the soul that remains on earth, because it keeps it anchored in a pain, that God has long been wanting to transform into something different. And for the soul of the departed, because bonds that have not been entrusted to God can act as an invisible weight that makes it harder for the departed soul to walk freely toward where God is calling it. The church does not speak of this as often as it should, but it knows and has always known. The intercession for the dead, masses of suffrage, the constant prayer for the souls in purgatory. All of that rests on a conviction that Catholic faith has held since its earliest centuries, that the bonds between the living and the dead are real, that they carry concrete spiritual weight, and that that weight can be lightened or made heavier depending on what the living choose to do with it. An object belonging to the departed, kept in the bedroom with love but without conscious entrusting to God, is one of those bonds made material. Not the only one that exists between the living and the dead, but one of the most concrete and tangible, because it is there, it can be touched with the hands, seen with the eyes, and a decision can be made about it. A decision that, on Divine Mercy Sunday, takes on an extraordinary spiritual reach. What does Saint Teresa of Jesus ask then? Not that you throw these things away without a second thought. Not that you erase the memory of the departed from your space and your life as though they had never existed. She asked something far more precise and far more beautiful than that. She asks that you entrust them to God with love, that you remove them from the bedroom not with indifference, but with a deliberate prayer, with the conscious gesture of someone who says aloud or in the silence of the heart, "What I have kept here, I place now in your hands, Lord, because you know better than I do what to do with this love that I do not know where to direct." But the objects of the departed are only the first of the groups Saint Teresa identifies. There is another that is more surprising because it concerns something that was meant to draw us closer to God, and that over time, without anyone noticing, has begun to do the opposite. There is an image that Saint Teresa of Jesus left written in the foundations that her Carmelite sisters recalled often and with great feeling. When she arrived at a new house that was to become a Carmelite convent, she would walk through every space with an attentiveness that her companions described as that of someone reading an invisible text written on the walls. And in the oratory, in the cells, in the corners where the sisters prayed, she sometimes found devotional objects that had been placed there in their time with genuine faith, and that time had worn down without anyone ever making the conscious decision to remove them. Faded holy cards where the face of the saint could barely be made out. Rosaries with broken beads, the thread hanging loose and frayed, never repaired or replaced. Candles burned completely to nothing, still sitting in their holders, because removing them had not seemed urgent to anyone. Medals blackened with age at the bottom of a drawer that no one could quite remember still existed. Saint Teresa of Jesus did not walk past these things. She stopped, and with a calm her sisters described as more eloquent than any speech she could have given, she gathered those objects, looked at them carefully, and explained with patience what she saw in them. She did not see a housekeeping problem or a merely aesthetic oversight that could be corrected with a damp cloth. She saw in those worn and forgotten objects a precise image of the interior state of the relationship between the soul and God. An image of a soul that at some moment in its history had drawn close to God with genuine fervor, had placed that rosary there as an act of love and faith, and then had allowed time and forgetfulness and routine to do their slow work without ever deciding anything about that object again, without renewing the gesture that placed it there, without honestly asking whether that object was still serving the spiritual purpose for which it had been put in that spot, or whether it had quietly stopped doing so without anyone noticing. Devotion, Saint Teresa of Jesus said, is not accumulation. This conviction appears implicitly in many passages of the interior castle and becomes fully explicit in the way of perfection when she speaks of vocal prayer and the danger of confusing quantity with depth. Saint Teresa warns against the natural tendency of the soul that believes more is always better in the spiritual life, that prays many prayers without praying a single one with its whole soul, that accumulates sacred objects in the bedroom and throughout the house without maintaining a living, attentive, and renewed relationship with any of them. The broken rosary at the bottom of the drawer is not an act of sustained devotion. It is the fossilized trace of a devotional act that happened in the past and was neither renewed with love nor released with gratitude. And that difference, which from the outside can seem small or even trivial, carries a weight in the soul that Saint Teresa knew with a precision that never ceases to astonish. Because the devotional object that is in the bedroom but is no longer used with awareness, that has been placed but not cared for, that has deteriorated but that no one has made the decision to reverently remove, is no longer speaking of a living relationship between the soul and God. It is speaking of a relationship that was once alive and has over time become routine, automatic, unconscious. It is speaking of a soul that once loved and now follows the motions of loving without examining them. And Saint Teresa of Jesus, who devoted her entire life to awakening souls from that kind of spiritual sleep, could not see this without naming it with love and urgency. In her own words, Saint Teresa wrote in the interior castle that the soul drowsing in its own habits is like someone who has entered the castle but has fallen asleep in the outer corridors, so close to the front door that the noise of the world enters easily and the voice of the Lord from within can barely be heard. The worn and forgotten devotional object in the bedroom is one of the clearest signs of that drowsiness, not its only cause, but one of its most visible and concrete signs because it is right there, in the most intimate space of the soul, speaking in silence of something the soul hasn't yet been willing to examine. This is the emotional heart of what Saint Teresa of Jesus warns about the bedroom and Divine Mercy Sunday. Because this Sunday carries a grace that the soul drowsing in its habits may let pass without receiving it fully. Not because God withdraws it, God does not withdraw His mercy, but because the soul, surrounded by the signs of a devotion that is no longer renewed, of objects that speak of a spiritual past that has not been brought into the present, may be so accustomed to receiving little that it no longer knows how to open itself to receive everything that Sunday offers. And Saint Teresa of Jesus, who knew that trap from within, could not stay silent. What does the soul do then that wants to prepare its bedroom for Divine Mercy Sunday, the devotional objects that have lost their living place? It does not pile them in another drawer. It does not move them from one corner to another without deciding anything. It reviews them one by one with the same quiet attentiveness with which Saint Teresa walked through the oratories of her convents. And with that same attention, it decides, this broken rosary deserves to be repaired or replaced. This faded holy card deserves to be released with a prayer of gratitude and replaced with one the soul can see with fresh eyes. This forgotten medal deserves to be rescued from the drawer and returned to its purpose or brought to the parish priest with love. Each of these decisions is an act of prayer. Each is the soul telling God that it wants to wake up before Divine Mercy Sunday and receive it with open eyes. But there is a third group of objects that Saint Teresa of Jesus identified in her warning. And this is the one that surprises people most, because it has nothing to do with the past or with forgotten devotion. It has to do with something that is happening in the bedrooms of millions of people right now, every night, without anyone yet having named it for what it truly is. Something has entered the bedrooms of millions of people in recent decades with such complete naturalness that no one has stopped to ask what it is doing there. It arrived gradually, first as a convenience, then as a habit, then as a necessity, until the moment came when the bedroom seemed inconceivable without it. A screen, a phone charging on the nightstand, a television facing the bed, a device that emits light and sound right up to the last moment before the eyes close, and that is there again, already lit, before the eyes have finished opening in the morning. No one made the decision for that object to be the first thing the soul sees when it wakes and the last thing it sees before sleeping. It simply happened. And it happened so quietly that most people have never even registered it as a decision that can be revisited. Saint Teresa of Jesus didn't know screens or smartphones, but she knew interior noise with a depth that no technology has made outdated. In the way of perfection, she devoted many pages to speaking of silence, not as the mere absence of sound, but as a condition of the soul that wants to be inhabited by God. She said that the soul that does not learn to dwell in silence is a soul that may love God sincerely, that may pray with fervor, but that never truly comes to hear Him. Because God does not shout, God whispers. And the whisper of God requires an interior that is quiet enough to perceive it, an interior that is not constantly saturated with images, voices, information, stimuli pouring in without pause, occupying every space where silence might otherwise settle. What Saint Teresa described as interior noise in the 16th century has today a very specific, constantly active external source. The device charging on the nightstand is not neutral. It is not simply an appliance. It is a permanently open door into a stream of content, images, words, other people's emotions, news, conversations, sounds, that enters the bedroom uninvited and colonizes the space where the soul should be most quiet and most available to God. The last thought before sleep is generated by that device. So is the first thought upon waking. And what the soul thinks as it falls asleep and as it wakes is not a minor detail in the spiritual life. It is the frame within which all interior life either happens or fails to happen. Saint Teresa of Jesus knew that the hours of dawn and the hours before sleep are the most sacred hours of the day for the soul. At those moments, the soul is most permeable, most open, less protected by the defenses that an active day builds up. What enters during those hours enters deeper than what arrives at midday. And the direction the soul orients itself in those moments of maximum permeability determines in large measure how the soul moves through the rest of the day and how it readies itself for prayer. That is why the bedroom is so decisive. And that is why what is in the bedroom during those hours carries a weight Saint Teresa of Jesus could not ignore. Can a devoted person who loves God and wants to receive Him on Divine Mercy Sunday with a prepared soul look honestly at what the device on their nightstand is doing during those sacred hours? Saint Teresa would have asked nothing less. She would have asked exactly that the soul look at itself with calm honesty, not with drama, not with guilt, but with the clear-sightedness of someone who truly wants what they say they want. Because there is a difference between wanting to receive the extraordinary grace of Divine Mercy Sunday and actually preparing the bedroom to receive it. And preparing the bedroom means examining which objects are fragmenting the silence that grace needs in order to take root. This does not mean the phone is a cursed object or that technology is God's enemy. It means that there are places and hours where that object should not be. The bedroom during the hours of sleep and of dawn is one of those places. Not because an external rule says so, but because the soul that has tried it knows the difference is real and immediate. The soul that falls asleep in silence and wakes in silence arrives at morning prayer from a different place than the soul that falls asleep watching a screen and wakes up reading messages. The readiness is different. The permeability to grace is different. And on Divine Mercy Sunday, when heaven bends toward us with unmatched generosity, that difference in the soul's readiness can be the difference between receiving a portion of what that Sunday offers and receiving it all. The thread that Saint Teresa of Jesus opened with her warning about the bedroom has not yet been fully tied off. Because there is a fourth group of objects she identified, And this is the one that makes the most people uncomfortable. Not because it is hard to recognize, but because many people have it in their bedroom without having ever consciously decided to put it there. It arrived with someone. It arrived as a gift. It arrived as a souvenir from a trip, a person, or a period of life that at the time seemed perfectly fine. And it has been sitting there, unexamined, without anyone ever asking whether what that object carries with it is something the bedroom should be holding during the most powerful moment of the liturgical year. There are objects that arrive in a person's bedroom without that person having consciously chosen them. They came from someone's hands. They arrived as a gift at a moment in life when accepting them seemed the natural thing to do. They came as a memento of a place visited, a season lived, a person known. They arrived and stayed because no one ever made the active decision to examine them. They blended into the landscape of the bedroom with the same quiet ease with which everything unexamined blends in, by becoming invisible. And yet they are there. And the question Saint Teresa of Jesus would have asked about each one is a question that is simple and at the same time profound. What does this object carry with it? What spiritual history does it bear? What is it that is actually dwelling in the most intimate space of your soul alongside you each night? Saint Teresa of Jesus was extraordinarily attentive to what she called the spiritual provenance of objects, not in a superstitious or magical sense, but in the most profoundly Catholic sense of the word. She knew that objects are not empty containers of meaning, they are bearers of history, and the history they carry can be a history of grace, or it can be a history of something that has never been brought into the light of God. An object that comes from a relationship marked by harm, by betrayal, by a rupture that has never truly been forgiven, carries the weight of that history. Not because it possesses autonomous power or is objectively dangerous in itself, but because every time the soul sees it, even without consciously paying attention to it, something stirs inside, a memory, a pain, a door it thought was closed that this object keeps slightly open without anyone having wanted that. In the book of her life, Saint Teresa of Jesus speaks with a candor that is deeply moving about the friendships and attachments of her younger years that slowed her progress in the spiritual life. She does not speak of those people harshly. She speaks of them with compassion. But she is very clear about the effect that certain unexamined bonds had on her soul for years. They kept her tied to a way of being and relating that prevented her from fully entering what God was offering. And when those bonds were finally brought honestly before God, when they were examined in the light of prayer and surrendered with love, something in Saint Teresa's soul was released. Something she had not known was bound, was set free. And the grace that had been waiting behind that bondage could at last do its work. The same is true of objects that carry the history of bonds the soul has not finished examining or entrusting to God. The gift from someone who caused you harm that you still keep in the bedroom without having fully forgiven. The reminder of a period in life when the soul drifted away from God, which that object evokes without anyone having decided it should. The decorative figure someone brought you from a place whose spiritual origins were never considered, placed in the bedroom because it was beautiful, without your asking what else it might be. Saint Teresa of Jesus would have looked at each of these objects with the same quiet attentiveness with which she walked through the oratories of her convents. And she would have asked the same question about each one. Does this object open the bedroom to grace, or does it close it? There is also, in many bedrooms, a mixing that Saint Teresa would have observed with particular concern. The sacred and the non-sacred placed together in the same space, without distinction, without hierarchy, without the order that faith naturally gives to the environment where it wants to live. An image of the Virgin Mary beside an ornament of uncertain origin. A crucifix on the same shelf as objects that have nothing to do with spiritual life, not because coexistence is impossible, but because when the sacred and the everyday share space, without the soul having consciously ordered that arrangement, what very often happens is that the sacred becomes invisible. The eye grows accustomed to seeing it alongside everything else and stops truly seeing it at all. And the sacred object that is no longer truly seen has ceased to fulfill the function that faith gives it in the space of the home. Saint Teresa of Jesus did not ask for aesthetic perfection or the monastic austerity that is impossible for someone living in the world with family, work, and everyday life. She asked for something far more achievable and far more transforming, that the soul make conscious decisions about its own environment, that the bedroom be the result of spiritual choices, not simply the accumulation of everything that has arrived without being examined, that every object living in that space should have passed through the honest question Saint Teresa asked: does this help the soul or hinder it? Does it open it toward God or close it upon itself? And Divine Mercy Sunday, with the extraordinary window of grace that Sunday opens, is the most powerful moment of the year to make that examination. To look at the bedroom with fresh eyes, to make the decisions that have been put off, to remove what needs to go, and to make room for what God wants to place there. But removing does not simply mean throwing things away. It means something very precise that Saint Teresa of Jesus described with a clarity none of her Carmelite sisters ever forgot. And that is exactly the next step the devoted soul needs to know before that Sunday arrives. There comes a moment in the spiritual life when the soul understands that it has been putting something off, not out of ill will, not out of any lack of love for God, simply because no one had clearly explained what that something meant or how to do it rightly. And when that moment arrives, when the soul finally sees clearly what it has in its bedroom and understands the weight those objects have had upon its interior readiness, the first reaction is almost always the same: the impulse to act immediately, to clear things out, to remove everything that blocks grace before another day passes. That impulse is good. It is the soul moving in the right direction. But Saint Teresa of Jesus, who knew that impulse and had seen it work in the souls she guided, had something important to say about it: that the way these objects are removed matters just as much as the decision to remove them. Because removing these objects from the bedroom is not an act of domestic housekeeping. It is not reorganizing the room by moving things from place to place. It is a spiritual act. It is the soul making a concrete and visible decision about its own interior life. And spiritual acts have a form that is not arbitrary. They have a form that the Church has preserved for centuries precisely because that form matters, because it protects the soul and ensures that the outward gesture corresponds to an interior reality and is not merely a physical movement without roots in faith. The first thing Saint Teresa of Jesus would have said about the objects belonging to the departed that the soul decides to remove from the bedroom is that they are not discarded. They are entrusted. There is an enormous difference between discarding and entrusting, and that difference is the entire distance between a gesture of cold renunciation and a gesture of surrendered love. The object that belonged to the beloved person who has passed is not dropped in the rubbish bin like a piece of worn-out junk. It is taken carefully in the hands, held for a moment, and a simple and genuine prayer is spoken over it. Lord, this object belonged to someone I loved and who is still in your hands. I remove it from this space not because I want to forget, but because I want to let go. Because I want my love for this person to pass now through you, and not only through what I have kept of them. Receive it, and receive them with all the mercy this Sunday pours out. That gesture, accompanied by that prayer, or any prayer that rises from the heart with the same intention, is not a ritual. It is faith in action. It is the soul making visible with its own hands what has been maturing within. And Saint Teresa of Jesus knew that when the soul makes its faith visible in that way, when it translates its interior readiness into a deliberate and concrete gesture, something happens in the soul that no purely interior prayer can generate in quite the same way. The soul commits itself, and the committed soul receives in a way that the passive soul cannot. The worn devotional objects the soul decides to remove follow a similar logic, but with nuances that the Church has clarified with care. A broken rosary is not placed in the ordinary rubbish. Objects that have been blessed or that have served a sacred function in the life of the soul deserve to be returned to the earth, which is the destination the Church recommends for sacramentals that can no longer be used. Burying them in a garden, in a potted plant, in any place where the earth can receive them, is the gesture that Catholic tradition has upheld for centuries for sacred objects that have reached the end of their useful life. Alternatively, they can be brought to the parish priest, who knows the proper way to dispose of them according to the tradition of the Church. What Saint Teresa of Jesus would not have accepted is indifference. The broken rosary that ends up in the bin alongside the day's ordinary rubbish speaks of a soul that has not yet fully understood what that object was in its life. Objects whose spiritual history is ambiguous, those that arrived through unexamined bonds, gifts from people who caused harm, mementos of seasons that have not yet been fully surrendered to God, can also be brought to the parish priest if the soul feels it needs a spiritual authority to accompany the gesture. Or they can be removed with a prayer of entrustment and forgiveness that the soul speaks over them before taking them out of the bedroom. The forgiveness the soul pronounces over an object is not a magical gesture. It is the soul completing in that moment something it had left unfinished. It is the soul saying to God, "Here is something I never finished bringing to you. I bring it now. Do with it what I did not know how to do." And the objects that fragment the silence of the bedroom, the devices that colonize the hours of sleep and dawn, do not need to be eliminated from the soul's life. They need to be relocated. They need to leave the bedroom during the hours when the soul is most exposed and most in need of silence. That decision, which may seem small and practical, is in reality one of the most profound the soul can make before Divine Mercy Sunday, because it is telling God with actions, not only with words, that it wants those sacred hours of dawn and sleep to belong to Him. And God does not overlook that kind of gesture. The thread Saint Teresa of Jesus opened with her warning is nearly tied. But there is something still unsaid, something that completely transforms the understanding of everything that has come before. Because removing what blocks is only half of the gesture. The other half is what enters when what was blocking leaves. And what Saint Teresa of Jesus said about the space the soul opens in its bedroom before Divine Mercy Sunday is the most beautiful thing of all that she warned. There is something Saint Teresa of Jesus understood about emptiness that no merely human philosophy has understood in quite the same way. The world fears emptiness. It fills it immediately with whatever is at hand, with anything that occupies the space and quiets the discomfort that emptiness produces in a soul unaccustomed to it. But Saint Teresa of Jesus did not fear emptiness. She sought it. She cultivated it with a deliberateness that her contemporaries sometimes did not understand, because they saw in that seeking a renunciation, while she saw in it a preparation. The soul that has cleared its bedroom of what was blocking, that has removed with love and faith the objects that were closing the door to grace, has not been left in poverty. It has been left in readiness, and readiness is, in the language of Saint Teresa of Jesus, the most precious thing the soul can offer to God. In the interior castle, she describes with an image you do not forget what happens when the soul truly readies itself to receive God. She says that the Lord needs no doors to enter the soul that wants Him, that where He finds readiness, He enters. That readiness is not merit or achievement, but openness. And that openness is built both in the interior of the soul and in the environment where that soul lives. The bedroom that has been examined with faith before Divine Mercy Sunday, from which have departed the objects that retained, that fragmented, that carried histories not surrendered to God, is not an empty bedroom in the sad sense of the word. It is a bedroom that is available. It is a space the soul has prepared for God with its own hands and its own choices. And God, who knows every gesture of the soul that loves Him, does not enter that space in the same way He enters a space that no one has prepared for Him. What does the soul place, then, in the space that has been left open? Saint Teresa of Jesus did not leave a list of required objects. She left something better, a principle. The principle that what enters the bedroom after the spiritual clearing must enter with decision and with awareness. It must be chosen by the soul with the same attentiveness with which the previous things were removed. And what Catholic tradition and the experience of Saint Teresa of Jesus point to as most proper for the bedroom of the soul that wants to live close to God is simple and within the reach of any person who wants to take it seriously. A sacred image placed with intention. Not piled among other things, but placed in a spot where the soul truly sees it, where the first and last movement of the eyes in that bedroom is a movement toward God. An image of Christ, of the Virgin Mary, of the saint of one's personal devotion, placed in the most visible spot in the bedroom with the awareness that that place belongs to God. Saint Teresa of Jesus was passionate about this. In the book of her life, she describes how sacred images helped her in moments when interior prayer became difficult, how seeing the face of Christ in an image drew her back into recollection when interior noise had pulled her away. Sacred images are not decoration, they are presences. They are the soul saying in the language of space what it wants to dwell alongside it. A small light, a candle, or an oil lamp, if the soul's devotion asks for it, can accompany that image during the most sacred hours of day and night. Saint Teresa of Jesus loved light in the oratories of her convents. She said that exterior light, well used, helps the soul to orient itself towards the interior light that is God, not as magic, as language, as the soul speaking in the language of its senses, the faith it carries within, and holy water. Saint Teresa of Jesus was absolutely clear on the subject of holy water in the space where the soul lives and sleeps. In the book of her life, she wrote about its power with a conviction born from her own repeated experience, that holy water has a real efficacy over the soul's environment when used with faith, that it is not a folkloric gesture or an empty custom, but a minor sacrament of the Church with its own grace, a grace the devoted soul can invoke over its bedroom and over its rest. Sprinkling the bedroom with holy water before Divine Mercy Sunday, with a simple prayer of surrender, is the final gesture by which the soul consecrates the space it has prepared and places it under God's protection. The Divine Mercy Sunday that is coming, that Sunday when heaven bends toward earth with an abundance of grace unequaled anywhere in the liturgical year, will find a different bedroom, not because it is more beautiful or more tidy in any aesthetic sense, but because the bedroom will have passed through the soul's hands with spiritual intention, because the soul will have made concrete and visible decisions about the most intimate space where it lives, because it will have released what it was holding, relocated what was fragmenting, surrendered what carried unresolved histories, and placed in that cleared space the signs of the only presence the soul truly needs. And Saint Teresa of Jesus, who saw with her own eyes what God does in a soul that truly readies itself to receive Him, would say about that prepared bedroom what she said about the convents she founded when they were ready to receive Carmelite life. That God does not delay when He finds the door open. That the mercy of God needs no greater invitation than the space the soul prepares with love. And that the soul that arrives at Divine Mercy Sunday with that space prepared does not yet know what it is about to receive. You have stayed until the end. And that is not by chance. The soul that seeks God seriously does not stop halfway. It arrives at the end. And what you have received today is not a checklist of things to do or a set of rules to follow out of obligation. It is something deeper than that. It is the gaze of Saint Teresa of Jesus on the most intimate space of your life. The bedroom where the soul stands before God each night, offered with the tenderness and clarity of one who has seen close up what God can do in a soul that truly readies itself to receive Him. You have understood today what Divine Mercy Sunday is and why this Sunday resembles no other moment in the liturgical year. You have understood why Saint Teresa of Jesus could not stay silent about what the soul keeps in its bedroom and what weight that has upon the grace this Sunday brings. You have recognized the objects that retain, that fragment, that carry histories not surrendered to God. You have learned the form that Catholic tradition asks be followed when removing those objects, not with indifference but with love, not as domestic tidying but as an act of faith. And you have received the promise that Saint Teresa of Jesus never tired of repeating to the souls she guided, that God does not delay when He finds the door open. Carry all of this with you this Divine Mercy Sunday, not as a pending task that generates anxiety, but as a gift already in your hands that only needs to be opened with faith. The prepared bedroom is not the perfect bedroom. It is the bedroom the soul has touched with intention. And that intention, sustained by the extraordinary grace of that Sunday, can transform what seemed impossible to release into the most beautiful thing the soul has offered to God in a very long time. There is one more thing I want to leave you with before we part, because what Saint Teresa of Jesus taught about the bedroom and the readiness of the soul does not end on Divine Mercy Sunday. It is the beginning of a way of inhabiting the space where you live. A way of understanding that the home is not a neutral stage set, but the environment where the soul grows or stalls, where grace settles or slides away, where God can or cannot do what He wants to do. And that understanding, once it enters the soul, does not leave. It changes the way you look at every corner of your home. It changes the way you decide what comes in and what goes out. It changes the relationship between the space where you live and the interior life you carry within you. Saint Teresa of Jesus left a teaching on this that goes far beyond the bedroom and Divine Mercy Sunday. A teaching about the whole home as sacred space, about each room as an extension of the inner castle that the soul is, about every object and every corner as part of the environment where God wants to be free to enter or finds Himself unable to. And that teaching is waiting. It is held in her writings and in the living tradition of the Church with a depth that her contemplative life deposited there, so that any soul that sought it with seriousness could find it. If you feel that what you have received today is only the beginning, that there is something more you have not yet finished understanding about what Saint Teresa of Jesus taught about the space where the soul lives, listen to that feeling. It is the soul recognizing that there is more for it, and there is always more. May Divine Mercy Sunday find you with your bedroom prepared and your soul open. May the grace of that Sunday enter your life without finding any closed doors. And may Saint Teresa of Jesus, who intercedes from heaven for every soul that calls on her with love, accompany each decision you make in this season with her maternal protection. In her own words, Saint Teresa of Jesus wrote, "Let nothing disturb you, let nothing frighten you. All things pass, but God never changes." May that certainty be yours today, tomorrow, and on Divine Mercy Sunday. Until next time, with all my love.